Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host, Alexis Avila.
And welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. This is episode 116 with educator and SAT expert Stacey Howe-Lott. And welcome back to the Prepped and Polished podcast. This is episode 116. Make sure you join our Prepped and Polished community on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, YouTube. Type Prepped and Polished. You will find us. Go to preppedandpolished.com and sign up for our free ACT essay course. That's preppedandpolished.com. Have a question or reaction during or after the podcast. Just go to email us at radio@preppedandpolished.com. Today, on episode 116, I'm talking to SAT expert, tutor, and educator, Stacey Howe-Lott. Stacey took the SAT about 45 times. She answered approximately 10,000 questions, provided 20,000 explanation, and has helped over 500 students improve their scores. Stacey graduated with a bachelor's from University of Puget Sound in English and has a master's in education from University of Virginia. On today's episode, Stacey talks about her experiences working as an online SAT tutor and gives us a peek into the world of test prep, revealing both the good and the bad. You're going to learn a lot of really good, honest information, and you definitely will love this episode. So let's get right to our guest. This is episode number 116 with SAT expert educator Stacey Howe-Lott. Stacey, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Alexis. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Can you share with us a little bit about your background and focus on a few pivotal moments that led you to where you are today as an educator and highly coveted SAT tutor?
Yeah, I was a teacher. I got a master's in education, and instead of going into the school system, I went into corporate, and I worked for Fortune 500 companies, helping them design training for their employees for about 15 years. And then I got married and had a baby, and I decided I didn't want to work full-time away from her. So I came home, and then I was home for 5 minutes and realized, wait a minute, I miss working. So I missed my students. So I started tutoring just local students in my neighborhood, my adorable little fourth grade girls, and then realized there's some real challenges when you're working with kids in different classes with different curriculums. There was a lot of overhead for me to go and figure out, what each teacher was doing and make sure I was working in partnership with them, all for, $15 an hour. So I thought, well, that's not sustainable because my babysitter was making more than I was at that time. So I fell into SAT tutoring, I needed something that was a one curriculum that I could learn and then teach to other people. And I also had all those years in corporate, I really got a systems approach of, what is not working exactly and how can we change it to get the result that we want with the minimum time, effort, and money to produce the results. So that systems approach really grounds all my SAT tutoring, that I go in and look at exactly what you're getting right and wrong, and really focuses in on the weaknesses, which is why I'm able to get kids great results in 4 to 5 hours instead of 30 to 60 as classes are. And I'm sure you have similar results as well.
That's awesome. And please share with us your recent tutoring news and how come the change.
Well, I've been doing this for about 5 years over at stellarscores.com, and I love it, and I love my students, and I put in years and years of study and research and creating my own reports and just really building up a very robust system around the current SAT. And as you know, the SAT has changed. The last test was given in January. There's that holdover of people who missed the January dates because of that huge East Coast snowstorm that hit you, I bet. And so some of those folks are held over till February. But now the new SAT in March is different. It's really different. And I looked at the mountain of work that it would take for me to become a great tutor of that one. And I thought, I don't have another 6 months in me of just really taking apart every question. I mean, just to prep for the current SAT, I answered probably 10,000 SAT questions. And I was just like, oh, I can't do it. So I am not continuing on as an SAT tutor.
Gotcha. And, you kind of already alluded to it, but what did you love best about your time SAT tutoring?
My kids, my students. I adore my students every day. I was so lucky that I got to get up and hang out with terrific kids. And I worked with kids all over the spectrum, right? That I worked with kids no matter what their scores were. If they were willing to work hard, I was willing to work with them. So I worked with kids down in the 400s. I worked with kids in the 700s. And to a person, these kids are remarkable. And I'm sure you have the exact same reaction about your kids, that they're just phenomenal. And it's such a joy to be able to work with such bright, courageous kids every day. And I miss them. I've been moping around the house for a couple weeks since the January test. Just very sad that I don't get to spend my days with my students.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what's your take on the new SAT? You kind of already talked a little bit about it. It comes out March 2016.
Yeah.
Harder, easier? Should students go ACT or jump right in?
So that systems approach, right, that I got from spending my time in the corporate life for 15 years, my approach is really data centric. So I believe you should skip the SAT this year, 2016, right, until the fall. But I don't think you should take the SAT this spring because the test is simply too new, and there's still, the score report tables aren't published yet. I just don't think there's enough data. So if you can, I would recommend going to the ACT for this year. Now, I think fall 2016 and on, all those data holes that we have right now will be filled, and then it'll be a test that'll be perfectly fine. But I would just say in the short term, if you can, skip it. I don't think it's necessarily any harder than the existing one. I don't think it's any easier than the existing one. I do think it's different.
Different test, definitely. Now, you did a lot of SAT tutoring online, and I was wondering, what are the pros and cons to online tutoring? Does it work for all students or only a certain type of student?
Great question. So 99.5% of my business over the past 5 years has been online. So almost exclusively I've worked online. And what I find is maybe one kid a year, it's not a good match for.
Okay.
So the vast majority of kids take to it like duck to water. Now, sometimes their parents are a little nervous, and certainly 5 years ago that was much more the case than it is now. Like now it's really normal that you go online to find something. My daughter just got a hamster. So how she studied up on that is she goes online to YouTube videos and watches people take care of her hamster. And it's perfectly normal for her. Like she doesn't go to a book first. She goes to YouTube first, which is really weird because, of course, growing up, you and I probably did very different things.
Yeah.
But now, so online, I believe, works beautifully with most kids. The advantages are no schlepping, right? That even my kids that I live in Seattle and even my kids that are local to me would choose to do online because trying to get after school and rush hour, trying to get anywhere in the city is so challenging. Also, as a mother, right, schlepping the children around, it's just so much more convenient that, especially around dinner time, I would rather be home making dinner, making sure homework's done and not having to schlep a kid around. Huge advantage. Also, that for that online, that often my students would sit at their dining room tables or their family room tables, and their parents would be in the background. They wouldn't sit in next to their child on the session, but they would be listening to it. And I think that was nice for parents. I recorded this session, so parents always could listen to the whole session, and they were always welcome to sit in. But most of my students wouldn't let their parents sit in. Parents wanted to. But I think online offers a lot of really great advantages.
That's awesome. Now, a lot of parents don't know this, but there are a ton of free SAT resources out there. From your experiences, what are the best resources out there for someone who can't afford tutoring or wants to get some extra prep?
Great. So I do think there are great resources out there. And I also think this is an industry that gets a lot of snake oil salesmen, lots of people saying fancy stuff and that isn't necessarily true. And as a consumer and as a parent, it can be hard to sort through which is authentic. So my hands down favorite resources are Mike McClenahan's blog, Pwn the SAT, and Pwn is gamer speak for own or as in win something. I did not understand that. My gamer husband had to explain that to me. Yeah. So it's called PWN the SAT. He focuses on the math, and he is amazing, and my students, especially the boys, adore him because he talks about math SAT questions in terms of like volume of zombie blood, right? It's not my humor, but the teenage boys just adore it.
Funny, yeah.
You know, so they really like it, and it's education-wise, it is rock solid. I also don't let kids hit it until they're at least in the 600s because it's incredibly challenging, fun, and incredibly challenging. But he's got a free blog, and he's got a book. He's now revamping his book for the new SAT, and I'm sure it will be as excellent as his first book was.
Oh, yeah.
Huge fan of mine, and he's a terrific guy. My other favorite SAT resource is The Critical Reader by Erica Meltzer. And she also publishes books, both a writing book and one for reading called The Critical Reader. And it's excellent. I'm a huge believer in authentic SAT materials. And the only two things I supplement with are either Mike's materials or Erica's materials because after answering 10,000 SAT questions, I can spot a fake at 10 paces. And those are the only two resources that I heartily recommend as really getting after the same things that the SAT gets after.
Perfect. Wow. Now, after your experiences, like, doing a lot of SAT tutoring, what do you find what does it really take for a student to get a big increase in scores?
Great question. So I think I think there's two things. One, Shakespeare, right? Know thyself. And so I think that's huge and not focused on in the industry as much as I think as it should be. And what I mean by that is kids have no idea about what their strengths are, their weaknesses are. And often what they'll tell you doesn't necessarily map to the reality. So when they take a test, they'll just look at the top line score and say, oh, I got a 550 and I really want a 700. But when you say, what did you do well on? They'll say, well, I did okay in math. Okay, really? So are you awesome? Or you're like, what are you weak on in math? Well, really, like I'm fine in math. But when you go in and look at the data, and I created score reports that did this to say, well, actually, you're okay in math, but you're terrible at functions, and functions show up all over the place. So let's really go in and look at what you're missing. So that's half of it. What exactly are you missing? And then the second half is why are you missing it? For example, there's a great, exponents show up all over the place, and there's really great exponent questions on the test. And kids will miss them all the time. But only about half the time they miss them because they don't know how to do exponents. Right? And you'd think, and parents always think, oh, well, they missed it because they don't know how to do it. So if I just tell them how to do exponents, then they'll get the question right. But really about half the time, what's underlying the reason they're missing any given question has nothing to do with math content. It has to do with strategy. They're rushing. They didn't read it. They're feeling pressured about time, and they're trying to answer too many questions. All of those aren't math content reasons. Right. Those are strategy reasons. And like I worked with two girls back to back, and one girl, every time she saw a math problem, she'd just grab her calculator and start punching in numbers and then say, okay, the calculator said 42, the answer must be 42. But she couldn't explain what she was doing. Like, there was no thinking going on. So for her, we said, you know what? There's no calculator for you. You have to think your way through. You've been using this crutch that isn't helping you. So the second she grabbed her calculator, her brain turned off. So we said, great, no calculator. Another girl I was working with in the same period wouldn't use a calculator. She thought she would like try and do simple math, which is what I recommend, like in her head. But every time she did simple math in her head, she got it wrong. So for her, we said, you're doing no math without your calculator. If you have to do 3 + 4, you grab your calculator. So isn't it interesting that we ended up with two opposing strategies, but they were custom built to what each kid needed? Wow. So really knowing exactly what you're getting right and wrong on the test is the first step, but then knowing how how you approach it. Where do you panic? Where do you stop? All of that, I think, is critical. So really knowing yourself is so key.
Absolutely. Wow, that's great. Fill in the blank for us. A good SAT tutor is?
Empathetic.
Okay, awesome.
Can I keep going, or did I just
keep. If you have a couple more, you got more than one shot. Give me another shot.
Empathetic, like you have to really get in your bones from their perspective why it looks overwhelming, why it looks impossible, why they turn left every time instead of turning right. Like you really, really need to get it. And there's a lot of teachers or tutors in the space that I think know the right thing to say, like exponents, look, the rules of exponents, blah, 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 but don't really get in their bones why students are making that mistake. And I think that if you really get why students make that mistake, then you're in a much better way to help them choose something differently. So I think truly empathetic, and I think expert, right? That what's tested, what isn't tested, how is it tested, what strategies will yield you the best scores in the shortest amount of time.
Absolutely.
People had always asked why I wasn't franchising out with the results I was getting. And I was like, really? Because no one would want to work for me. Because my first thing would be get a master's in education. My second thing would be do every problem in the blue book with an explanation of why each wrong answer is wrong and why a kid might take it and what strategy you would put in place if that kid chose that wrong answer so they wouldn't do it again. And then, of course, no one wants to do that. So I didn't franchise.
Do you find that when an SAT tutor's rate goes up, the quality of teaching goes up as well?
You know, that's a really, really good question. And I don't know to what extent they're related.
Okay.
Fair. I know when I was teaching at $20 an hour, I was giving the same extraordinary value well above what I was charging in the same way that I was doing at $200 an hour, that I was giving extraordinary value way above the money that I was charging. On the other hand, looking at it purely from a market point of view, one would assume if you can't sustain yourself at a high rate, right? If you're not getting repeat business at a high rate, then one would assume your product isn't good enough for people to pay for it. So I think there may be some correlation. But especially online, right? Marketing usually a fancy website often trumps out really amazing results.
Wow.
I mean, do you know what I mean? I
do.
In any online space, right? You go to a web page and it looks great and you think, my gosh, this is great. And they can say the right things on a marketing page, but I'm not a marketer. I don't have a flashy website.
Right.
I just get great results. So I don't think necessarily that the fancy one that looks really amazing is necessarily the best one. I think the best thing to do, and what I always provided, is references. To talk to people both students and parents that have used that tutor. to find out how was it.
That leads to that's great, because my next question was, are there bad SAT tutors out there? And without naming names, how can parents spot out a bad tutor before it's too late?
Yeah. So, yeah. And again, I've got an interesting, different perspective, because I'm a trained educator and I'm also an SAT expert. Yep. So, and, we don't grow on trees, right? I can name, 5 people out there that have the same qualifications that I do. You're one of them. Mike, Akil Bello over at Bell Scores, Jen Cohen.
Yep.
At Word Nerd, Mike McClanahan and Erica Meltzer. There's just a handful of people that really know the SAT inside and out and have the years and years of experience working with hundreds of students and get the results time and again. So lots of bad stuff out there. So I think that as a mother, how I would do it is I would ask for references and talk to both parents and students.
Perfect.
Because you want to, and red flags would be, for me, and again, I go against the industry here. Those big box stores, which we won't name, that say, here's 30 hours and it's $1,500 and, there's no refunds. I mean, they might say there's refunds, but in actuality, there are no refunds. And if you don't get the score that you want, come on back and take the same ineffective class again at no charge. Which is crazy, but they lock parents in, and parents are petrified for laying down that kind of money. And then the score's in, and then you're done, right? Now you're in senior year. So I disagree with that. I never had packages. I mean, if I didn't deliver value every session, if the score didn't go up or we didn't make the difference, or, and move the ball down the field the way that you wanted to, don't hire me again. Why would I lock parents in? And so I'm very suspicious of things that you get locked in without being able to say, wait a minute, this isn't working for me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, give the customer the chance to walk if they're not happy from session to session. If
you believe in what you're doing, like if you really believe you can get the result, then stand up and prove it. Why hide behind locking somebody in? Now, from a business side, right? I mean, I'm a really great teacher and I'm a terrible business person. So from a business side, I understand, because you want to lock in that recurring revenue. So it makes much more sense to try and get all that money from parents if you're running a business. But if you're an educator and your goal is to make a difference with students and you put students first, then I don't think you'd lock in packages, which again, I'm like one of the only, I get it. That's way out of step with how most people run their businesses, but I think it's important. So yeah, don't get locked in. See if they're going to make a difference with your kid. There's also, over the years, there's maybe 3 kids that I didn't gel with. So we had one session and I called the parent and I said, you know what? It's not a match between us. So I recommend you, and here are references to other tutors.
Perfect. Now, I'm sure that you've dealt with some stressed out parents. I was wondering if you have any advice to the parents listening who are feeling the college application process mania.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. It's an arms race, and it doesn't need to be. You do not need the ACT and the SAT. Choose one. I say that till I'm blue in the face. My parents don't listen. They choose both anyway. So my first thing to parents is, okay, breathe. Right? I know it's hypey out there and all of that, but just take a step back and breathe. You can do this. Many parents have done it before you. We all, like, there are parents that are coming up that we're doing it after you. You can do this. Focus on your child and the well-being of your child.
Love it.
I think for a lot
not a good time. Please come back. Thanks.
I think for a lot of kids, classes can make sense. Right? If your kid kind of falls in the middle of that bell curve, if your kid, can sit in a class and get value out of that, great. If you got the time to do it, great. I mean, if your kid refuses to do one on tutoring and isn't going to study on their own, if you go to class with his buddies,
Right.
And, hey, they're sitting in class, they're getting value out of that. I think that's really good. I think some parents are scared off from tutoring by the price, but I actually think tutoring can actually be cost effective, because I think you can do, with the right tutor, you can meet for 3 to 4 sessions and accomplish as much as you could at a lower, right? I work with kids on average 3 to 5 hours. So I end up being cheaper than classes. And I think parents I think parents are scared off by a high hourly rate of tutoring, saying, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work for my kid. But 2 to 3 tutor sessions for some kids can make a huge difference.
I love it. So what's next for Stacey Howe-Lott?
So I am doing a similar, for me it's similar, that I'm working with entrepreneurs and helping them train their audiences better. So, and really it's the same job for me. Students perform on the SAT, and I go in and we look at how they did and we talk about how they can do it better.
Right.
And so now I've just switched my focus for working with other entrepreneurs out there, because everyone and their dog is teaching stuff online, and people aren't. We need more teachers in the world. There's an art and a science to instruction, and there's an easier way to teach people so that kids can learn or adults can learn. So I am now working with entrepreneurs, helping them create training that's more effective for their people.
That's awesome. Do you have a website that you're going to develop down the road, or?
I do. It'll be under my name. It's got all sorts of Lorem Ipsum Latin text up there now of placeholders,
so we'll be able to find it.
Yes, it'll be StaceyHowe-Lott.com.
Nice. Okay, that's good to know. And that leads me. How can we best get in touch with you?
Come on over. Any SAT questions, come on over to Stellar Scores. You can send me an email at Stacey@stellarscores.com. And I'll leave the contact page up on my website as well.
Okay, awesome. Now the teenage years it's an exciting time. It's overwhelming. To any teens listening to us today, any words of wisdom before they cross that bridge into young adulthood?
Yes, you can do this. You can do anything you put your mind to. Figure out what it is that you need help with, right? Figure out where you've got gaps, and then go find people that can help you fill those gaps in your knowledge, and do it. And from our perspective, I know at the time SAT seems like do or die, like your whole life is riding on this score. And let me tell you, from the other side, it's not. It's just a stupid number, right? It's a hurdle you have to get over, but after you do, nobody cares. No one asks. I mean, have you ever been asked at a party, have you ever been asked your SAT score?
I mean, not recently.
Employers don't ask. I mean, truly, that I know it really looms large, and it's not. It's just a number. All we want you to do is do your best, right? To do the best that you can, and that's all that we ask. Perfect.
Well, Stacey, thanks for coming on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And this wraps up our show. This was episode 116 with Stacey Howe-Lott. Make sure to check out Stacey's website, stellarscores.com. And by the time this airs and in the future, you can find Stacey at staceyhowelott.com. You can also connect with Stacey. I know she's very active on Twitter at Stacey Howe-Lott, StaceyHoWelott. I hope you enjoyed episode number 116 with Stacey Howe-Lott. For another related conversation, check out my podcast with Debbie Steer. That was episode number 30, Debbie Steer. Meet the woman who took the SAT 7 times in 1 year. Episode 117 is coming soon. It's our next tutoring tips episode. 5 ways to get an A in school. To access all of my podcasts, go to preppedandpolished.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.